There was a point in my marriage when silence stopped feeling like peace and started sounding like a warning. I don't know exactly when that happened. I used to think silence meant comfort. Two people so at ease with each other that they didn't need to fill every space with words. I built a whole life around that belief. I convinced myself that when Maura stared out the window during dinner, she was just tired. That when her phone lit up and she turned it face down without reading the message, it was just out of habit. I even ignored the way she flinched ever so slightly when I touched her shoulder as she passed by. None of it screamed betrayal, but none of it felt right, either. It was the kind of wrong that lives in the details, too small to call out, too heavy to carry alone. We'd been married for 16 years. We never had children. That part was complicated, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just wanted it to be. The truth is, she changed the subject every time I brought it up. She'd smile and say something like, "Let's just enjoy what we have," or, "The world's already full, isn't it?" I never pushed. I was raised to believe that love meant respect. That saying, "I trust you," means not needing all the answers. But now, looking back, I wonder if that was just an excuse I used to avoid the truth, that I was afraid of what the answers might be. She used to travel for work. Not often, but enough. 3-day conferences, mostly. Sometimes New York, sometimes Chicago. She always came back with hotel soaps in her bag and a new story about someone on her team doing something ridiculous. I listened. I always listened. I thought that was my role, the man she could come home to. A constant. Steady. Reliable. She never had to wonder where I was. I never gave her a reason to doubt me. And somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing that she no longer offered me the same courtesy in return. The shift was gradual, like a tide pulling back from the shore. First, she started locking her phone. I didn't ask why. Then, she began going to bed earlier, falling asleep before I even turned off the TV. Some nights, she slept facing the wall. I used to reach out and place my hand gently on her back, just to feel the rise and fall of her breathing. She'd shift away almost immediately, muttering something about the room being too warm. After a while, I stopped trying. But it wasn't until that Tuesday afternoon that everything began to make sense. She had left her laptop open on the kitchen table, something she never did. Maura was always careful, always tidy, too tidy. I walked past it on the way to the fridge and glanced at the screen without thinking. What I saw wasn't some explosive revelation. It was just an open calendar invite. But it was the title that caught my attention. Afternoon at Halcyon, Suite 312. No meeting details, no attached documents. Just that. I didn't touch the laptop. I didn't open any messages. I didn't need to. The name Halcyon wasn't just a hotel. It was where we stayed for our anniversary 5 years ago. The same suite, even. She had said it was her favorite place in the city. Apparently, it still was. I stood there for a long time, watching the cursor blink in the corner of the screen. My chest didn't tighten. My heart didn't pound. There was no cinematic gasp of realization. It was quieter than that. Just a hollow, settling feeling. Like when you finally understand that something is over and has been for a while. That night, I didn't say a word. She came home late, kissed me on the cheek like she always did, and said the traffic was brutal. I nodded, asked her how the meeting went. She said, "Fine. Just long." I smiled. So did she. But in that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. She wasn't lying to protect me. She was lying because it had become effortless. And for the first time in 16 years, I wasn't sure who I was to her anymore. But I knew who I was to myself. And I knew what kind of silence I couldn't live with. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Not the next. Not even the week after. It wasn't out of fear, or cowardice, or denial. It was because I needed to understand something that went deeper than names, places, or who she was with when I wasn't around. I needed to know when it had stopped being us. When had she stopped choosing me, not out of duty or habit, but out of desire? So I watched, not with suspicion, but with clarity. And what I saw broke me more than any affair ever could. We still sat across from each other at dinner, but the meals had changed. She didn't ask for seconds anymore. She no longer added extra salt to her potatoes like she used to. And she always made sure her phone was face down, not with paranoia, but muscle memory. Her eyes no longer stayed on mine long enough for anything real to pass between us. She looked through me, not at me. It was like sharing a table with someone gently fading out of frame. That Friday I cooked. Not just anything. Her favorite, lemon-roasted chicken with rosemary and a warm fennel salad. I even opened the bottle of wine we had saved since our last anniversary. She walked in, heels clicking softly, phone pressed to her ear, murmuring something about next quarter projections. I waited. She didn't notice the smell, didn't comment on the candles, didn't look at the wine. When she finally hung up, she blinked once, then smiled, polite, rehearsed. What's the occasion? I shrugged, masking everything inside me with a light laugh. Felt like doing something nice. She nodded, sat down, and took one slow bite. It's good, she said, already checking her notifications again. Really good. And that was it. No memory sparked. No glance shared. Just two people sitting at a table like strangers who happened to share a last name and a mortgage. Halfway through the meal, she said she had a call she couldn't miss. She kissed me on the temple, not lips, not cheek, but the temple, and disappeared down the hall. I listened as her voice changed tone. Not louder, not flirtatious, just different. Brighter, younger. The kind of voice you use when you still care how someone hears you. I sat alone at the table until the candles gave up and the wine turned warm. Not angry, not crushed, just quiet. And that was when I knew. I didn't need a confession. I didn't need a hotel receipt or a shadowy photo of her in someone else's arms. The loss wasn't in what she was hiding. It was in what she had stopped giving. Love doesn't leave with the slamming of a door. It vanishes with each untouched moment. And there, at the center of that empty room, surrounded by all the things we built, I realized I was the only one still living in our marriage. So I started planning. Not revenge, not confrontation, something quieter, something final. I started waking up before the alarm. Not from stress, not from fear, just stillness. That strange kind of early morning quiet where nothing's wrong, but everything feels off. The house would hum like always, the soft whir of the fridge, the light creak of the floor near the back door. But the energy inside was different, like the walls were waiting for something to happen. Or maybe I was. Maura was already out of bed most mornings by the time I opened my eyes. Her side would be cold, the bathroom door slightly ajar, steam long gone. Sometimes she'd leave a cup of coffee on the kitchen counter. Never next to me, never handed to me. Just there, like a reminder that routine still existed, even if connection didn't. That week, I noticed more details. The subtle way she'd change her outfit after I left the room. How she began typing with her laptop angled away from the hallway. How she never asked how my day went, not once, but offered long, drawn-out stories about people I didn't know. Names I had never heard before started surfacing more often. Isaac says this, or Claire thinks that. But Isaac came up more. Too much. There was always laughter when she mentioned him, always a second of silence before she moved on to the next topic. A pause long enough to notice, short enough to pretend it meant nothing. I didn't ask, not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I already knew what the answer would sound like. Dismissive. Light. You're being paranoid. He's married, Thayer. He's just a friend. The usual phrases women have said to men like me for centuries. Men who feel the truth long before it's spoken. Instead of pressing her, I started reclaiming my quiet. I took longer drives home from work. I sat by the lake we used to visit when things were simple. I reread old journals I thought I'd forgotten how to open. And each day, I wrote a single sentence at the top of a page. What changed? Not once did I write her. Not once did I write me. I just waited to see which truth would eventually show up. By Thursday, I stopped trying to make dinner. She ordered takeout before I could even suggest anything. Pad Thai, extra spicy. Her favorite. Not mine. She didn't ask what I wanted. Just tossed a fork my way and started scrolling. I sat at the opposite end of the couch, eating in silence, watching her face flicker in the glow of the screen. She wasn't smiling at anything I said. She wasn't listening. She was somewhere else. With someone else. And then came the moment that sealed it. Not loud. Not dramatic. She got up to take a call. But this time, she didn't even pretend. She didn't leave the room. She just turned her back, lowered her voice, and said, "Yeah, I missed that too." It hit like a whisper, not a scream. She didn't know I heard. And I didn't let her know. I just sat there, staring at the fork in my hand like it had answers. There was nothing left to chase, nothing left to argue for. I wasn't going to beg someone to come back to a room they'd already emotionally left. That night, I wrote something different at the top of my journal. If she crossed the line, would I say anything? I already knew the answer. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't even raise my voice. I'd just leave the way I lived, steady. And next time she looked around for me, I'd be nowhere in sight. The night before Maura left for her so-called conference, I watched her fold laundry for the first time in weeks. Not because there wasn't any before, but because she'd stopped doing it. Or rather, she'd stopped doing anything that wasn't directly related to her phone, her work, or her other life. But that night, she folded clothes like someone preparing for inspection. Every edge crisp, every sweater laid just so. It was the way people pack for a trip when they're nervous or guilty. I sat across the room, pretending to scroll my phone, but I wasn't looking at anything, just watching her hands. She never looked up. I noticed she didn't fold any of my clothes. Not a single one. Only hers. The air in the house was thick with unsaid things. Every drawer she closed echoed. Every hanger she lifted sounded like a door shutting. I almost wanted to say something. Not to accuse her, not to ask why. Just to break the spell of pretending. But I didn't. Because I knew, when people have already left you in their heart, there's no need to call them back. They stopped hearing you a long time ago. Instead, I walked into the spare room after she fell asleep, or at least, after she started pretending to. I laid out a notebook. I wrote down one line and underlined it twice. She doesn't know she already lost me. That was the moment I realized I didn't need proof anymore. I didn't need to catch her, corner her, or hear her stammer through a lie. I didn't need to see Isaac's face or read their messages. I didn't need to track the hotel room or time her calls. What I needed was already in motion. I was detaching. Quietly, deeply, and without ceremony. The next morning, I got up early, earlier than her. I made eggs the way I used to before she went cold. Not for her, just for me. I poured coffee and sat outside on the porch while the sky was still pale. I watched a crow hop along the edge of the lawn, pecking at something invisible. It was strange. I hadn't done that in years. Just sat, breathed, observed, without trying to fix anything, without trying to hold something together that didn't want to stay whole. She left just after 9. She kissed my cheek like always. That careful, casual gesture. Familiar. Practiced. Meaningless. I didn't say, I love you. I didn't say, be safe. I just said, drive slow. She didn't notice the difference. That weekend, I didn't touch her things. I didn't check her drawers. I didn't scroll her tablet or open her email. I didn't need to. The betrayal wasn't hidden anymore. It lived in her absence, in her fading laughter, in the way she smiled more into her phone than she had at me in months. Instead, I started collecting my own things, but not in a panic. With intention, I packed the photo of my parents she never liked, the leather journal she always said was too dramatic, the vintage camera I hadn't used in a decade. I moved slowly, carefully, like I was building a version of myself that didn't revolve around waiting. By Sunday night, she texted. Just a single line. Flight's delayed. I might be home late. No emoji. No question about me. No apology. Just logistics. I stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it. She thought I was home, probably sitting on the couch, probably heating leftovers, probably wondering how much longer I'd have to pretend not to know. But what she didn't know was that I had already made a choice. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg. When the moment came, and I could feel it nearing, I wouldn't say anything at all. Because the version of me that used to wait for her was already gone. The night she came back, it rained. Not a storm, just a slow, tapping kind of rain, the kind that doesn't ask for attention. It started just after dusk and hadn't stopped by the time I heard the car pull up. I had left the porch light on, not for her, but because I liked the way it lit the ivy on the side of the house. She hated that ivy. Always said it made the place look old. I always liked that it looked like it belonged to something older than us. She came through the door with that familiar sigh, the one she always gave when she thought being busy made her interesting. Flight was brutal, she mumbled, tossing her bag by the stairs. Airport was packed. I swear people have forgotten how to walk in straight lines. I nodded, standing in the kitchen, stirring a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking. She asked what I'd been up to. I said, reading. She didn't ask what. She said she was exhausted and headed up to shower. No hug, no smile, no questions. The quiet that followed was thicker than usual. I walked past the stairs, through the hallway, and stopped by the window in the back room. I had left it cracked open the night before, on purpose. The breeze smelled like wet grass and cold wood. I closed my eyes and listened. Not to her, not to the house, but to myself. And what I heard was nothing. No ache, no jealousy, no weight in my chest. I wasn't waiting for her to come down and tell me the truth. I wasn't hoping she'd sit across from me and cry and say she made a mistake. I didn't want the story anymore. The story had already told itself, in the calendar invite, in the silence, in the way she touched her phone with more tenderness than she touched me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man being left. I felt like a man who had already left quietly, without slamming any doors. Later that night, as she slept, I sat by the window again. The rain had stopped, but the wind had picked up, and the ivy swayed like it was trying to speak in some forgotten language. I listened. I let it wash over me. I remembered the first time Maura and I had talked about marriage. We were lying on the floor of her apartment, eating cold pizza and laughing about the things we swore we'd never become. "Promise me we'll always talk," she said. "Even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard." I promised. She did too. But somewhere along the way, she replaced honesty with ease. Conversations got replaced by assumptions. And love, whatever version of it we had, got replaced by something much quieter, much less generous. I didn't blame her. I didn't blame myself. I just accepted it. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I didn't tell her I wouldn't. I didn't explain. I took the blanket from the couch, grabbed a book, and curled up in the back room with the window still open, letting the air in, letting the old version of my life out. Maura didn't notice that I hadn't come to bed until the second night. That morning, I made coffee like I always did. I didn't change anything. The mugs were in the same place. The sound of the machine was the same low hum. But something in my movement must have tipped her off, because she paused in the kitchen doorway, watching me. She didn't say anything at first. Just watched. "You didn't sleep upstairs," she finally said. I didn't flinch. No. There was a pause, not quite long enough to matter, but enough to show she wasn't used to hearing honesty delivered that simply. No excuse. No decoration. She nodded, then reached for the almond milk and asked, "Everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I was playing a game, but because I realized, in that moment, that her question wasn't real. It wasn't about me. It was about her comfort. She didn't actually want to know if things were okay. She just wanted the reassurance that nothing had changed on my end. I looked at her and said, "Yeah, everything's fine." She smiled. Just slightly. The same kind of smile you give when the waiter finally brings the check. I didn't mention the unopened suitcase still sitting by the stairs. I didn't ask why she hadn't unpacked it. I didn't comment on how her phone had been face down all morning, or how she flinched when a text came in and she didn't recognize the alert tone I'd changed overnight. I'd done it on purpose, just to see, just to test the atmosphere. And the reaction told me more than any message ever could. But again, I said nothing. Instead, I started doing small things that only I would notice. I backed up my hard drive. I organized my documents. I cleaned out the garage, took down boxes that hadn't been touched in a decade. I found letters I wrote her when we were still dating. I read them quietly, alone. They were filled with hope, with plans, with versions of us that never came to be. I put them in a manila envelope and placed it in my car, not for safekeeping, but because I knew I'd want to leave them behind somewhere, not with her, but far from where she could reach them. On Wednesday, she called me from the car. Said she'd be late. Didn't say why. Didn't ask what I needed. Didn't even ask if I was okay. And in that moment, I didn't feel sadness. I felt space. Not the lonely kind. The kind that finally lets you breathe. I grilled dinner that night just for myself. Ate outside under the string lights we put up 2 summers ago, back when she still laughed at my bad jokes and touched my shoulder just because. I remember the night we hung those lights. We had gotten mosquito bites all over, but we didn't care. We danced barefoot on the deck with a Bluetooth speaker playing something soft, something like Norah Jones or Amos Lee. I couldn't remember the song, just the way she looked at me. That version of her no longer existed, and I was done trying to resurrect it. Later that night, I wrote in my journal again, but not the short sentences I'd been doing before. This time, it filled the whole page. "You will leave her the way you lived with her, quietly, without asking for permission." I read that sentence aloud to myself. Twice. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like truth. Maura still hadn't unpacked, and I still hadn't told her that I was making plans of my own. But they were there, real, solid, growing more complete by the hour. She didn't know it yet. But she had already come home to a man who had no plans to stay. She kept asking if I was tired. Over dinner, during a drive, brushing past me in the hallway, always with that same half-hearted tilt of the head, like concern was something she remembered from long ago but no longer knew how to perform properly. "You seem distant," she said. "Are you okay?" She asked, always a beat too late, always with the undertone of someone who isn't trying to understand, just trying to manage the atmosphere. I didn't lie. I just didn't elaborate. I'm fine. Because I was. Or at least, I was becoming fine. There's a kind of clarity that only comes after grief has already burned through you. When you've stopped hoping things will change. When you stop flinching at late-night messages and faint perfumes you didn't recognize last week. When you stop rewinding conversations in your head looking for signs. I was no longer in mourning. I was in motion, not loud, not chaotic, just deliberate. That week, I started moving my things. Not to boxes, not yet, but mentally. I started seeing which drawers I'd miss, which objects held weight. I walked through each room of our house, not as a husband, but as a guest cataloging a place he would never return to. My eyes touched everything, the books I knew she'd never read, the kitchen appliances she swore we needed but never used, the photos on the wall we stopped updating 7 years ago. There was one of us in Lisbon, by the yellow tram. I stood in front of it for a while. We looked so young. But I wasn't smiling in it, not really. Just that kind of half-smile people give when they know they're being watched. I wondered how long I'd been posing, not for the picture, but for the marriage. I spent that weekend doing the kind of work she wouldn't notice. I started changing passwords. I called the storage unit I'd rented years ago and told them I'd be returning soon. I checked my bank accounts, created backups of documents. I didn't rush. I wasn't hiding. I just didn't announce anything. I no longer needed her to witness what I was doing. It wasn't for her. Sunday morning, she asked if I wanted to go out for breakfast. It had been months since she offered anything like that. I think she sensed something, not guilt, not fear, but the shift in me. That deep, unsettling calm people don't recognize until it's too late. I've got errands, I said simply. She asked if she could come. I said, it's probably just stuff you wouldn't care about. And I meant it. Because the errands weren't for groceries. They were for me. Quiet errands that looked like nothing. A visit to a second-hand shop to donate a sweater she bought me that never felt like mine. A walk through a bookstore where I bought a novel I used to love before I forgot what I even liked. I stopped at a park bench on the way back and sat for an hour without speaking, watching kids play, couples argue gently about coffee orders, a dog chase leaves. For once, I didn't feel the need to return quickly. There was no urgency anymore. Home had become a hallway, not a destination. That night, Maura sat next to me on the couch with her legs curled up like she used to do when she still wanted to be touched. I didn't move away. I didn't move closer. I just existed beside her, like two books on a shelf that had stopped being opened. She reached for my hand, but she held it like someone remembering, not someone feeling. And that's when I knew. We weren't failing. We had already failed. We were just performing the ending now soft, slow, polite. I didn't need an explosion. I was already gone. I left on a Thursday. Not for any symbolic reason. It just happened to be the day the sun came through the window a little earlier than usual. I had woken up before Maura, made my own coffee, and packed the last of my things, not in a rush, not with music playing, not like a movie. Just quietly, methodically, like someone leaving a hotel they'd stayed in too long. I didn't take everything. Only what I needed. A couple of worn notebooks. My father's watch. That old sweater she never liked but I always loved. The photo from Lisbon, the one where I wasn't really smiling, I left it behind. It belonged to a version of me I didn't carry anymore. She was still asleep when I stepped outside. I looked back once, not at her, but at the house. It wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for a while. And that was okay. I drove north. No real plan. Just the kind of direction that feels like air instead of weight. I stopped at a diner off the highway, the kind with chipped mugs and pie that tastes better than it should. The waitress called me Han and smiled like she meant it. I sat near the window, watched people come and go. No rush. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I laughed. Not loudly. Not for show. Just to myself. A short, honest laugh that came from nowhere in particular. The kind of sound you make when your body finally understands you're free. Not from a person, but from the need to fix what never wanted to be saved. Over the next weeks, I stayed in a small cabin near a lake. Rented monthly. No TV. No schedule. Just time and space. I read until I fell asleep. I cooked simple meals. I swam at dusk. I let my phone ring and didn't answer. It was Maura a few times. She never left a message. And eventually, the calls stopped. She knew. I didn't need closure. I didn't need her to explain. The closure had come long before the leaving. In the silences, the missed glances, the hand that once reached for mine, but forgot how to hold it. Months passed. I started hiking again, wrote a little, took photographs, made friends with the owner of a used bookstore in town who loved blues records and brewed terrible coffee, but had a heart the size of a house. One morning, I met someone on a trail, a woman named Aloan. Not loud, not dazzling, just kind, real. She laughed with her eyes, talked softly, asked questions, and actually listened. We walked for miles. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. We met again the next weekend. And the next. It wasn't a love story. Not yet. But it didn't need to be. It was something even more rare. Peace. And that, I've learned, is the most beautiful thing that grows in the space where love used to live. When you finally stop holding your breath and let yourself begin again.